The dust storm had passed an hour ago, leaving Kane's boots crunching through crystalline sand as he approached the smoking crater. His scanner chirped insistently, metal signatures, power cells, maybe salvage worth the 3-day trek from the mining outpost. He'd been alone on Epsilon Tertius for 8 months now, and the solitude had become a second skin. The escape pod was embedded nose first in the rust-colored earth, its hull marked with symbols he'd never seen. Kane circled it cautiously, pulse rifle ready. Pirates sometimes staged wrecks as traps. But when he pressed his hand against the damaged hatch, he heard something that made him freeze, a soft, pained whimper. The emergency release sparked under his multi-tool. The hatch groaned open, releasing a wave of cooler air and an unfamiliar scent, something like cinnamon and ozone. Inside, curled against the far wall, was a woman unlike any he'd encountered. Her russet fur caught the dim emergency lights, sleek and soft-looking despite the dried blood matting patches near her shoulder. 2 alert triangular ears swiveled toward him, and amber eyes with vertical pupils locked onto his face. Her body was humanoid enough, curves in familiar places, delicate hands now raised defensively. But the elegant tail wrapped protectively around her legs, and the digitigrade feet left no doubt she wasn't human. "Easy," said Kane softly, holstering his rifle. "I'm not going to hurt you." She made a sound, melodic but incomprehensible. Her translator unit hung broken from her collar, its display cracked. Kane's mind raced through first contact protocols he'd learned years ago in academy training. He slowly pulled out his canteen and offered it. She studied him for a long moment, those unsettling eyes seeming to catalog every detail of his face. Then, with visible effort, she reached forward and accepted the water. Her fingers brushed his, warm, surprisingly soft despite the retractable claws he could see she sheathed beneath. While she drank, Kane assessed her injuries. The shoulder wound looked clean but needed attention. "Can I—" He gestured toward it. She understood the intent, if not the words, and gave a slight nod. As Kane carefully cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies from his pack, he became acutely aware of how close they were in the confined space, the warmth radiating from her body, the way her breathing hitched when he touched tender flesh. When he finished, she spoke again in that lilting language, then gestured to the broken translator. Kane examined it. The damage was extensive but repairable. He had tools back at his shelter. Making a decision that surprised even himself, Kane stood and gestured for her to follow. "Come on, it's not much, but it's safe." After a moment's hesitation, she arose gracefully and followed him into the dying light. Kane's shelter was a converted cargo container, half buried against the wind. Inside, it was cramped but functional. Bunk, workbench, food synthesizer, and enough spare parts to build a small ship. The Foxwoman, he'd started thinking of her that way, stood uncertainly near the door while he cleared his bunk. "Sit," he offered, patting the mattress. She settled onto it with feline grace, watching as he spread the translator components across his workbench. The work was delicate, requiring focus, but Kane found his attention drifting to his unexpected guest. She'd been examining his living space with obvious curiosity, her tail swishing in what he hoped was interest rather than agitation. 2 hours later, he snapped the final component into place. "Try this." She fastened the repaired unit around her neck, and her ears perked forward as it hummed to life. "Can you understand me now?" Kane grinned at the sound of accented but perfectly comprehensible standard. "Loud and clear. I'm Kane." "Rhiannon," she replied, and the name suited her. "You have my gratitude, Kane. Not many would help a stranger, especially one like me." "What happened to your ship?" Her expression darkened. "Sabotage. My own people, seeking to prevent what I carry." She touched a small pendant at her throat. "May I ask, do humans still know the old stories about bond walkers?" Kane frowned. "Can't say I've heard the term." Rhiannon's tail dropped slightly, but she nodded as if she'd expected this. "Perhaps it's better. Old superstitions." She winced, touching her bandaged shoulder.
You should rest. Take the bunk. I'll sleep in the chair. I cannot take your bed. Not up for debate. He softened it with a smile. You're injured and you've been through hell. Sleep. She studied him with those penetrating amber eyes, and Kane felt something shift in his chest. You are kind, kinder than my own kind have been. As she settled into his bunk, Kane dimmed the lights and tried to make himself comfortable in the worn chair. But sleep eluded him. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked at him, the warmth of her touch, the mystery surrounding her presence here. Around midnight, he heard her shifting restlessly. Kane? Her voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? Would you... The nights on my world, we don't sleep alone. The cold here... She trailed off, sounding embarrassed. I understood. The desert nights were brutal. I'd been managing with thermal blankets, but she came from somewhere else entirely. Scoot over. He felt her move, making space. The bunk was narrow, forcing them close. Her back pressed against his chest, her tail curling around his leg. She was warm, incredibly warm, and her fur was softer than anything he'd ever touched. Thank you, she murmured. Kane's arms settled naturally around her waist, and he felt her relax into him. Get some sleep, Rhiannon. But neither slept immediately, both acutely aware of the other's heartbeat. Morning light filtered through the shelter's small windows, and Kane woke to find Rhiannon still pressed against him, her breathing deep and even. In sleep, she looked peaceful, the worry lines smoothed from her face. He took the rare moment to simply observe the delicate bridge of her nose, the way her ears twitched in dreams, the elegant curve of her neck. Her eyes opened, immediately finding his. For a moment, neither moved. Good morning, she said softly. Morning. How's the shoulder? Better. She sat up, and Kane tried to ignore the loss of her warmth. You've done more for me than I had any right to expect, but I should tell you why they wanted me dead. Kane started a pot of coffee, real coffee, one of his few luxuries, and sat across from her. I'm listening. Rhiannon's fingers traced the pendant at her throat. My people, the Volpari, were dying, not from war or disease, but from isolation. Centuries ago, we believed in bondwalkers, beings from the stars who could join with us, share life force, create offspring that carried the best of both species. It was supposed to save us from genetic stagnation. Sounds like arranged marriage with extra steps, Kane observed. She smiled sadly. Perhaps, but the prophecies said bondwalkers would be human. When we finally encountered your species 50 years ago, our elders declared the time had come. But many, including the current regime, called it heresy. They said humans were too different, too dangerous, that the old ways would destroy us. And you? I studied everything about humans I could find. Your resilience, your capacity for loyalty to those you choose rather than just bloodkin, your ability to adapt. Her eyes met his intensely. I believed the prophecies, so I took this, a genetic marker that would prove bond compatibility. The regime discovered my plan to seek out a human partner. They tried to kill me for it. Kane absorbed this, his coffee growing cold in his hands. You're asking me to... what, exactly? Rhiannon stood, approaching him with careful steps. The bond isn't just symbolic, it's physical, genetic, a joining that would link our life forces, allow us to share strength, perhaps even extend both our lives. But it requires choice, willing choice. I cannot ask it of you, Kane. You saved my life, that's more than enough. But the way she looked at him suggested she wanted to ask. Kane thought of his 8 months of solitude, the years before that drifting from one contract to another, never connecting, never staying. He thought of how right it felt to hold her last night, how he'd already started imagining keeping her here, making space for two. This bond, he said carefully, it's permanent as two lives intertwined can be. He stood, closing the distance between them until he could see his reflection in her amber eyes. And if I said yes, what happens? Her breath caught. You would say yes? To me? A stranger? Not even your species?
"You're not a stranger anymore." His hand reached up, hesitating, then gently touched her cheek. Her fur was impossibly soft. "You're not a stranger anymore." His hand reached up, hesitating, then gently touched her cheek. Her fur was impossibly soft. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. The bond would require intimacy, physical joining. Our people would be connected at a fundamental level. "Then show me," Cain whispered.
Rhiannon's eyes opened, searching his face for any hesitation. Finding none, she took his hand and placed it over her heart. He could feel it racing beneath his palm. "Once begun, it cannot be undone," she said. "You must be certain, Cain." In answer, he leaned down and kissed her. Her lips were soft, warm, and after a moment of surprise, she responded with an urgency that spoke of need and loneliness matching his own. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I'm certain," he said. She led him to the bunk, her movements graceful despite her injury. The pendant at her throat began to glow softly as she removed it, placing it carefully on the nearby shelf. Her hands went to the fastenings of her flight suit, and Cain helped her ease it over her injured shoulder. Her body was a beautiful fusion of human and vulpine, curves that made his mouth dry, soft fur that caught the light, and an entirely alien beauty that captivated him. When she reached for his shirt, her claws retracted, fingers trembling slightly. "I've never," she admitted. "Our people, we don't, not like this, not unless—" "Neither have I," Cain confessed, "not anything that mattered." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands exploring the texture of her fur, the warmth of her skin beneath. She made a soft sound, almost a purr that vibrated through both of them. Her tail wrapped around his leg as she pressed closer, and he could feel every point where their bodies touched like a brand. They moved together slowly, learning each other. Cain traced the edge of her ears, discovering they were incredibly sensitive, making her gasp. She explored the planes of his chest, her touch leaving trails of fire. When he kissed along her neck, careful of her injury, she arched into him with a soft whine that sent heat straight through him. "Cain," she breathed, and his name in her voice was the most perfect sound. He laid her back gently, mindful of her shoulder, covering her body with his. Their eyes locked as he entered her, and the sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, not just physical pleasure, but something deeper, a resonance that seemed to echo in his chest, his mind, his very soul. Rhiannon cried out, her claws emerging just enough to grip his shoulders without breaking skin. The pendant on the shelf flared brighter, and Cain felt something shift fundamentally inside him. Images flooded his mind, not his memories, but hers, running through amber forests, the taste of fruit he'd never eaten, the grief of watching her people fade, the hope when she'd first read about humanity. And she was seeing his life too, the loneliness of space, the ache of never belonging, the moment he'd seen her in that pod and decided to care. They moved together, the bond intensifying with each moment until Cain couldn't tell where he ended and she began. When release came, it was mutual and overwhelming, waves of sensation and emotion crashing through both of them, fusing something that could never be separated. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both trembling. The pendant's glow had settled into a steady pulse. "Can you feel it?" Rhiannon whispered, her hand over his heart. "The bond?" Cain could, like a thread connecting them, warm and unbreakable. He could sense her emotions, contentment, wonder, and beneath it all, fierce love already taking root. "Yeah," he said, pulling her closer. They stayed in bed as the mornings stretched into afternoon, neither willing to break the cocoon of warmth and newfound connection.
Cain traced lazy patterns through Rhiannon's fur while she mapped the contours of his chest with her fingertips. "What happens now?" he asked eventually. Rhiannon propped herself up on one elbow, studying him with those luminous amber eyes. Through their new bond, he could feel her considering her words carefully. "Now we choose, together." "Explain." "The bond is formed, but our future isn't written. We could stay here, you could continue your work, and I could adapt to this world. Or," she paused, vulnerability flickering through their connection, "we could return to my people, show them the bond is real, that the prophecies weren't mere superstition. We could potentially save my entire species from extinction." Cain sat up, the weight of her words settling on him. Through the bond he felt her conflict, desire to stay in this safe bubble they'd created, warring with duty to her people, and beneath that, fear that he'd choose his solitary life over the unknown with her. "Tell me about your world," he asked. Her face lit up, hope blooming in his chest. Her hope or his, it was becoming harder to distinguish. "Vast forests that shimmer like copper in autumn. Cities built in harmony with nature rather than against it. My people are artists, philosophers, scientists. Before the stagnation, we were vibrant." She touched his face gently. "But I won't lie to you. Many will hate you at first, fear what you represent. The regime that tried to kill me still holds power." "Sounds dangerous." "Tremendously." Through the bond, he felt her bracing for rejection. Instead, Cain pulled her close, burying his face in the soft fur of her neck. "I've spent years drifting, never finding a place I belonged. Then you crashed into my desert, and suddenly, I don't want to go back to being alone, Rhiannon. I choose you, wherever that leads." The emotion that flooded through their bond was almost overwhelming. Joy, relief, love so fierce it made his breath catch. She kissed him deeply, and he felt every ounce of her gratitude, her wonder that he'd choose her over safety. "There's a Vulperi outpost 3 systems from here," she said when they finally broke apart. "We could send word, request an audience with the council. If they see the bond is real, see that a human chose willingly." Her tail swished excitedly. "It could change everything." Cain stood up, pulling her with him. "Then we'd better start preparing. My ship isn't much, but she'll get us there." Over the next few hours, they packed Cain's essential belongings and salvaged what they could from Rhiannon's escape pod. As they worked side by side, Cain marveled at how natural it felt. This woman who'd been a stranger yesterday was now the most important person in his universe. When night fell again, they made love once more, slower this time, savoring each touch and sensation. The bond thrummed between them, stronger than before, and Cain understood now why Rhiannon called humans bond walkers. This wasn't just partnership. It was 2 souls learning to walk the same path, their steps synchronized in ways that transcended species. As Rhiannon slept in his arms, Cain stared up at the Selter's ceiling, thinking about the future. The old him would have been terrified, giving up his solitary life, traveling to an alien world, potentially facing hostility and danger. But the old him had been slowly dying of loneliness, even if he'd refused to admit it. Now, with Rhiannon's heartbeat steady against his chest and their bond humming contentedly between them, Cain felt more alive than he had in years. She'd said she needed a chosen protector, but the truth was more nuanced. They'd chosen each other, and in doing so had given each other purpose. Tomorrow, they'd begin the journey to her world. There would be challenges, opposition, maybe even danger, but they'd face it together, 2 lives now walking as one. Cain pressed a kiss to Rhiannon's forehead, feeling her stir and nestle closer even in sleep. Through their bond, he sent a simple message, "I'm here, always," and felt her wordless response, "As am I." The desert wind howled outside, but inside, 2 souls had found their home in each other. Whatever came next, they would face it together, bond walkers indeed, charting a path toward a future neither could have imagined alone.